Уважаемые коллеги, прежде всего, позвольте вас, конечно, поприветствовать. Здесь много журналистов. Насколько мне проинформировали, более 800 человек в общей сложности. Приятно, что такой интерес к пресс-конференции. Не могу сказать, что у меня недостаток общения с журналистами. Я регулярно встречаюсь, общаюсь, и в ходе моей повседневной текущей жизни и во время поездок в регионы, а таковых за последнее время у меня, в тот период, когда я работал в правительстве, и вот работаю президентом, было много. Я посетил практически все регионы нашей страны, кроме двух. Но эти два обязательно посещу в ближайшее время. Со многими представителями нашей региональной прессы я встречался и даже вижу некоторые знакомые лица в зале, что особенно приятно. Но тем не менее, вот такой большой пресс-конференции не было. И, наверное, в этом есть резон и определенный смысл для того, чтобы обменяться впечатлениями о развитии нашей страны
have an exchange of views on the development of our country and on some international affairs. So once again, I would like to thank you for your interest to this press conference. I'm sure that you will have some interesting questions for me. I don't know if my answers will be as interesting for you. I'm ready to start work. So let's start working. Yeah, it's nice to have so many questions. One more thing I'd like to say first. I think this is the first time in our country's history where the president will conduct the press conference himself without any help from his staff. So, I hope you won't be offended. I'll just point my finger to you and will ask, like, Sector A, row 10, Mr. or Miss, and then you'll rise up and ask your question, okay? Just for us to get started, I think it would be appropriate to ask a TV journalist to get the ball rolling. I saw Sergey Brilov here. Sergey, I probably would ask you to start.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'd like to ask you about inevitability, or the degree of inevitability. This conference is taking place in Skolkovo. We're used to calling it the center of innovation. Perhaps it's even symbolic to a degree that it's outside the Moscow ring road, outside of Moscow. Yet it is still fenced off. What's your take on the prospect and the inevitability of modernization in our country?
I don't think we should think that modernization is something set in concrete. I remember at one point in the past, we talked about the first year of perestroika, the second year, the third year, and then we all know what happened afterwards. So, modernization is a process. And it's an important process. I think that the most important thing is to make sure that we have a new quality in our country's development. Modernization, I think, is not just gradual development. It's not just consolidating some positive results that we have already achieved. No. Modernization is a qualitative change in the situation. And I'm pretty sure we are not there yet. But it doesn't mean that we should make a U-turn. We shouldn't talk about a new wave of modernization or something like that. No, modernization should go on. And the 5 priorities that I have set, they're still there. We still work on them. These are very important areas of our work. In all those areas, we have government programs that are being financed, that are being carried out. Have we achieved any outstanding results yet? No, we haven't. And actually, I think this is what should motivate me and my colleagues in the government to work day and night, trying to change life in our country. So once again, I repeat, modernization is the most important thing in our country's development, and this should bring about a qualitative change in our country. We shouldn't just celebrate some anniversaries. And I enjoy the fact that I'm talking about this here in Skolkovo, because Skolkovo is a special place to me. It means a lot. It is a significant place because it is here that we are developing new technologies. It is here that we have set up Skolkovo University, the Skolkovo School. We are going to have an innovation center here, and I would like this brand to be known worldwide, not because this is the only place where we should invest money, but because whatever you do, you should have some main, key, crucial elements that serve as a benchmark for everybody else. So I believe Skolkovo will become this kind of benchmark for modernization, but of course not the only one. By the way, I would like to thank everybody who works here in Skolkovo for hosting us today. Of course, we could have this meeting in the Kremlin, but I think it is better to be here. All right. It's quite hard to choose. All right, let's go to Ksenia Kaminskaya, ITAR-TASS news agency. I'll probably mention some people I know personally. Please don't feel offended. But it doesn't mean I'm going to talk to the Kremlin pool only.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. You've replaced 24 governors, but you haven't replaced a single minister. Why is that? Does that mean the situation in the regions is worse than in the center, or are you more satisfied with the work of federal officials? Well, would the question of retiring the prime minister become relevant in the near future?
All right, Ksenia, it's not 24 governors that I have replaced. Actually, I think half of all our governments have been replaced, and we have new people working in those places. Some of them left on their own accord, and for some I had to make an executive decision. With others, their term ran out, and it was not extended. Still, it was a serious change in terms of the composition of the core people who govern our country. We never come to govern for the rest of our lives. People who do that usually end up not too well, and we actually saw some examples of that around the world recently. And governors should have the same approach. It's not right for a person to stay in his position for 20 years. Even if you're a good manager, if you're well prepared, you know your territory very well, still, we should let the young take up place. We should prepare new personnel. We should raise up good successors around us. So we're doing this work and we'll continue doing that. And eventually, I think we'll have more modern people working in our regions, people who are more ready to work. Of course, there will be some mistakes. This is inevitable. Now, what you said about the central government, this doesn't mean that the situation with the central government is better than in the regions, but still, it is obvious that when we discuss the work of the government, I actually talk about the government as a whole, not just about individual ministers. The government works as a team. As you know, quite often I criticize the government. And I actually reprimand some people, but still, I think the government is working as a clock, and it would not be appropriate to tear some pieces, some individuals out of it. But after all, the president has various powers, including the authority to dismiss the government, and this authority is still there. So That's the way it is. Okay, one more thing I'd like to say. Please don't feel offended. This is something that I used to tell my college students. If you don't mind, I'll just go sector by sector. We'll finish with one sector first, and we'll go on to the next one. We'll go from left to right, and then we'll probably go up, and then we'll come back here. All right? So for the time being, I'll just keep talking to the left sector over there. So how about you, the young man over there, with the letter R in his hands? Speak up if you...
I represent the radio station Avtoradio. My question is about parking spots.
Okay, so it's not R, it's P.
This is a huge problem for drivers in Moscow. And what I'd like to ask is, recently, the Moscow officials decided to charge 500 rubles an hour for an hour of parking in Moscow. What do you think about this initiative, and how do we solve the problem of parking in Moscow? I know that your wife has 2 parking spots, and yet I have nowhere to park my own car. Can I perhaps borrow one of her spots?
All right. About Moscow, we all know that the situation is pretty bad. And this has to do with the way this issue was handled in the past. And I understand that Muscovites are not too happy that they can't get a parking place. They have to spend long hours in traffic jams. What do we have to do here? What we need is to develop new capabilities, build new roads, and make decisions on traffic regulations. And I hope the new mayor will do all that. 500 rubles for parking, this is ridiculous. Even in Moscow, where living standards are much higher than in other regions. Of course, I realize the reason they do it. They just want to scare people away. It's like they say, if you want to park your car, pay 500 rubles. And if it's an important place, it's maybe even 1,000 rubles. And they hope people will not park their cars there. But I don't think this is the best way to deal with this problem. So I hope that Moscow will sort out this problem. I think Mayor Sobyanin has already spoken something on this issue, and I think his view of the problem on those payments was about the same. Now, about your car, well, I will consider your offer, but we should make sure it's mutually beneficial. We do have 2 parking spots that are not being used, so you have a chance, but like you said yourself, they don't belong to me, they belong to my wife, so I cannot make a decision without her if she doesn't mind, and if you can offer something that would interest her, then we'll be willing to consider your offer. All right, now let's go a little bit further. How about you? The girl over there? Yes, you. Go ahead.
Независимая газета, newspaper. Mr. President, I have to ask you this question because I think everyone present here is concerned about this. How long are you going to maintain the question about the elections? Because surely you've come to some decision yourself. And another question, we are an oil extracting power, yet the prices for gas keep growing, and the governors keep promising to improve the situation, but we don't know whose fault it is.
All right, finally you asked this question. I thought it was going to be first, and it was only fourth. Friends, I've read some materials before this press conference, things that you have published in various media outlets and on the internet. Naturally, everybody, including everybody present in this room today and others, are all expecting some interesting news. You know, political life is not a show. It's not a show at all. Political life is complicated work. It is sophisticated. And I think, and many other people who deal with practical politics think that there are certain technologies that you should follow in political life. We're doing that in order to achieve our objectives. Our big objectives are to change our life for the better. We want our people to have a better life. We want to raise their living standards. We want to implement our social programs. But there are some technological things, and they're quite serious too. We deal with practical politics not just to entertain ourselves, but because we want to achieve success. So this kind of decisions should be made at a time when the situation is right, when this would have the final political effect. So, to announce such a decision, you need a different format, not a press conference. Although this press conference looks very nice and attractive maybe, but still, this kind of a decision should be made in a different situation and should be announced in a different way. At the same time, I think that every politician should make such statements when he thinks it's appropriate. Around the world, we have a big number of political figures who make an announcement right after a political campaign that I'm going to run for president. And usually, such promises take you nowhere. On the other hand, we should all use strategies that lead to success. So, I don't want to hear the kind of thing that, this country, they made an announcement about that, and another country, they also made an announcement about that, and we keep mum. No. Once again, I say we should be very logical, but this doesn't mean that this situation will continue forever. Naturally, there are certain laws that govern electoral campaigns, and I will follow those laws. So if I want to make a statement, I will make it. Quite recently, I gave an interview to our Chinese colleagues, and I told them that there's not too much time left. So, I mean, the statement is close at hand. Now, about gas prices. Actually, these two things may be interconnected. The decision whether to run and gas prices. Probably you know why gas prices are going up. This is because of the general trend, because oil prices in general are going up. And our government is taking some measures to deal with this problem, but even our government is not always able to deal. There may be collusion in some cases, but we should realize that our efforts to regulate the market cannot always be effective. Still, the government has been instructed by me that they should deal with this problem and bring the prices down as much as they can. I mean, gas prices. In what way can they do it? Well, there is no other way except restrictions, and the government has used this right. They're going to introduce heavy taxes, heavy duties, but this will not continue forever. oil prices, gas prices are important to us, and we are interested in oil prices being reasonably high. The prices are going up, and eventually this may result in negative consequences. Remember the time when oil prices were $147 per barrel, and this eventually resulted in a global economic crisis, and this is not right. Including Russia, we will deal with this, but this is a difficult problem. Of course, we should stop all attempts at collusion on the market, and we are working on that. All right, let's go on. And I can see Anton Vernitsky from Channel 1. I don't want Channel 1 to be left out. Anton, I saw a little bit on the internet your interview with somebody, and this person was saying something interesting about bin Laden. Is it true what he said?
He claims it is.
Okay, I think America will be terrified.
My question isn't about that, however. It's about Russia. Thanks for the high-speed internet connection here in Skolkovo. I can monitor the situation in
Me
St.
too.
Petersburg in the Legislative Assembly. The deputies are discussing the prospect of revoking the authority of Sergei Mironov. Could you comment on that? And what's your attitude towards this Federation Council? Is it in line with democratic principles and the principles of federalism?
All right. There is nothing abnormal about any resignation. Like I said earlier, sooner or later, everybody has to go, and you have to be ready. When you set out on this journey, when you start your political career, then it won't be that difficult for you to leave when you have to deal with the consequences of some of your actions. In this sense, the situation with Mironov is just like with everybody else, with other political figures. Mr. Mironov is the chairman of the Federation Council, the upper chamber of our parliament. He has been working for a long time, but he represents a political force, just Russia. And the fact that the party has certain questions, there's nothing abnormal about that. We all want to have political competition. We don't want to have one party that will decide everything. So there you go. This just reflects the contradictions that we have in our political life. So if this decision is made today, I think that Mr. Mironov should take it calmly, and eventually, I emphasize, eventually, this will benefit both United Russia and just Russia, because United Russia is demonstrating that it's a force to be reckoned with. It's not like they criticize a man that they have promoted and then they are unable to terminate his term. And on the other hand, Just Russia is showing that it's an opposition party. So in this sense, everybody will benefit. Let's do real politics. We have an election coming up. Now about the Federation Council. We had different periods in the history of the Federation Council. I remind you that according to the Constitution, there is a certain procedure for the Federation Council. Initially, it was elected during the transition period. Then the members were appointed. First, there were governors, then chairmen of legislative assemblies, and now we have a new procedure starting this year. We have a third way. We have modernized the second procedure. Now we can have people who were elected in the region, representing the region in the Federation Council. I think it's a democratic procedure, and I think it is better for the Federation Council to serve its purpose, to be a chamber of the regions. But in this situation, I always think that our democracy is still young, and I don't rule out
the possibility that sometime later we may have a different idea on how the Federation Council should work. We can have this system for the time being, but never say never. At some point, we may elect Federation Council members, but before we get there, we should first take some time and do what we are doing now. I don't think there is anything terrible about that. In many countries, it took decades to develop a certain mechanism on how their parliaments are formed, and we are doing the same. All right, we have a big sector over here, so probably I'll pick out the ones I know first. Mr. Kolesnichenko from Arguments and Facts, if you have a question, please go forward. Go ahead.
I do have a question. I'm going to use this situation for my personal benefit, in a sense, although I'm only one of the millions. You said in late April that the technical examination procedure for cars should either be cancelled or be made more relaxed. Frankly speaking, this isn't the only pointless procedure in the country, but let's deal with this. Have you delivered on your promise?
Okay, thank you. Yes, we do have a clear realization on that. Just yesterday, I had a meeting with the first Deputy Prime Minister, and today I'd like to tell you what we have decided. And I think it's quite reasonable. You're right, this procedure should not be senseless, and it shouldn't be a burden, it shouldn't be an idiotic procedure that is awkward for everybody. Okay, what we should do, we should be able to know what kind of vehicles our people use. So we have a very reasonable proposal that we should drop technical inspections by police, and we should combine technical inspections with car insurance procedure. And then we'll do this in repair shops. From time to time, everybody has to go to a repair shop. So when you get your car insurance, you will also have this certificate for technical inspection. New cars will not need that at all. I think for 3 years after you buy a new car, you'll get it automatically. Then until 7 years, you'll do it once every 2 years, and after 7 years, when a car gets a little older, you'll have to do it every year. But once again, I emphasize this will no longer be done by police, and the procedure will be very simple. You'll do it the same time you get the mandatory insurance for your car. I think this decision is quite reasonable, and this will make this procedure pretty much formal. And we'll do this the sooner the better. You mean when we'll pass the law? Well, like I said, maybe today or tomorrow the government will send a bill to the State Duma, I mean the amendments, and they will be adopted. And next year, I think this procedure will start working. All right, now. Okay, let's just follow the same procedure. We used to start with you, but okay. You have the floor. I think I know what you're going to ask about. About the second term?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for giving the microphone, because we've had bets on whether I'll be able to ask another question.
Yes, and we had no preliminary agreement.
Yes. You said at the beginning of your speech that you traveled around the country with journalists. I'd like to confirm that me and Mr. Medvedev did indeed visit the Orenburg region and several other regions. we visited the Gvozdika private village, and I got the chance to see the world through the eyes of the president. The world is almost perfect, and it took me some while to get used to my previous life. So that cottage village seemed perfect, but the country is not like that. If we go to any other village, we'll be asked a million questions, 1,000 questions. People's rights are being violated. They're not living in accordance with the law or the constitution. So the question that I've been wondering about, how do you think your view of the world is objective?
All right, so it's a philosophical question. Now, when you ask this kind of questions in big press conferences, you really get more philosophical. Unlike you, I didn't get the impression that this place, Gvozdika, was perfect. In fact, it was on the contrary. Of course, when a big boss comes to a certain place, the local authorities do their best to make sure it looks nice. But after all, the same place, they didn't have gas infrastructure and other problems. The only thing, I think, is after I visited the place, they installed gas infrastructure. I think it has been done because they asked me about that. But the picture was not perfect, and actually the situation may be even worse in other places. And of course, we have to do something about our dachi communities. And many of our people have dachas. And even it is easier to get a plot of land these days or purchase it. People get used to it. They don't want to leave. They like it there at their dachas. And our job as government officials is to make sure that they have nice conditions there. But we should not do this in Moscow region alone or in Orenburg or just someplace. This should be done through local government bodies. Now about the way I see the world. Of course, I would like very much, after I finish my work, I would like to be able to say that the way I see the world has not changed. I still hope that I'm a sober man and I'm able to see the world not through pink glasses. I hope I know life as it is. I do travel a lot. Perhaps I'm the first leader of the Russian state who is going to visit all the regions, all the territories of our country. And this helps me to deal with problems. This is a kind of, if you will, whenever you visit places, they may put up fences or cover some things that don't look nice, but still, you have to keep a fresh outlook on things. And the way to do this for the president is to travel a lot, talk to people a lot, and to get accurate information. Accurate information is something that you all work on. Good journalism. In addition, we have the internet today. And I can tell you, frankly, in this sense, I'm very fortunate as president because I get information not just from official reports that my aides bring to me, and I'm very thankful to them for it. But I also get information directly from people through the internet, through blogs, through Twitter, and other places. And as you know, people don't mince their words there. Nobody before me ever did that. So I'm pretty sure I'm able to see the situation as it is. And I think this is something that all the other presidents who come after me should do. That's the way life is today. Okay. Finally, I think we should... What? Okay, I can ask somebody whom I don't know, like I don't know you, so go ahead.
Mr. President, we have in fact met at the Economic Forum when you were not a presidential candidate back then, and you answered
That's
from
even
Radio
better.
Freedom. I represent Radio Freedom, Radio Liberty, and today I'd like to ask you, as the head of state and a lawyer, the first question is, how would you define today Russia's relationship with the United States of America and the West in general, namely the NATO bloc? What problems are you facing and what progress have you made? Another question is also about international affairs. Lately, the Russian authorities has been going through a discussion on whether Russia, in fact, needs to fulfill the decision of the International Tribunal of Human Rights, because the tribunal has made several decisions that affect Russia. And the question is about the spirit of these rulings. What's your outlook on this?
Okay, thank you. About Russia and NATO, this is a pretty big subject. And this is something that I have to deal with every day. I deal with those things every day when I read reports from ministers, when I read reports from our security services, when I prepare for meetings with foreign leaders, many of whom represent NATO. At present, our relations with NATO are not that bad, actually. And I think it's good. It's good for both parties. We had a dramatic, difficult period when we basically suspended our relations, and this was not our initiative. It was NATO's initiative. And I said at the time, it's up to them. If they don't want to cooperate, we are not going to insist. What I mean is August 2008. Has been a long time since then, and on the whole, I think the situation is developing in a normal way, and I'm quite happy with the meeting I had in Lisbon during the Russia-NATO summit. We raised some important issues. We have agreed to cooperate on strategic areas on our agenda, including Afghanistan, the war on terror, our drug trafficking, our efforts with respect to drug trafficking, and we have some new issues that we need to reach an agreement on. Otherwise, the situation will be pretty bad. What I'm referring to is missile defense, of course. Of course, it's a special subject, and I'll say a couple of words, even though I have actually spoken about this on many occasions in the past. We would like the European missile defense system to develop based on clear-cut rules. It should be obvious to everybody that missile defense is a way to block or reduce the strategic capabilities of other countries when they tell us it's not against us. Of course, I agree with that, but I realize at the same time that other countries don't have such capabilities as Russia. Usually they say it's Iran or some other country. They don't have the same capabilities as us, so this is actually going to work against us. Then you should cooperate with us, or you should be frank about it. I think those questions that I put to my friend and colleague, Mr. Obama, I hope they will answer those questions and we'll be able to work out a model for cooperation on missile defense. Otherwise, we'll have to take measures, and we don't want to do that. Then we'll have to quickly develop our strike potential for our nuclear arsenal. And this is a very bad scenario. This is the kind of scenario that would send us back to the Cold War era. And I told my colleagues, you know, in 2020, after we pass through all the 4 phases of this adapted plan, phase-adapted plan, it's quite possible it's not going to be you making those decisions and not me. But there will be people who will be making those decisions, and most probably a Russian leader will follow these considerations. So we need to consider right now in what way we will hand over this problem to next generations of politicians. This is very important, and we can ruin everything we have achieved, including this very important START treaty, because there is a clause there that says that if missile defense is developed and strategic parity is disrupted, this treaty can be cancelled, terminated. And I would like to ask all my partners in NATO to seriously consider this. We are ready for cooperation, and at the same time we hope that we will have guarantees that those capabilities are not going to be used against us. But I'm not finished. You had 2 questions, so as a very thorough person, I will also address your question on the European Human Rights Court. All right, Russia is a member of this court, and Russia has signed all the membership documents, and we have to respect all the decisions of this court. To us, our membership in European institutions is very important. At the same time, we see some difficulties that we come across because we are a young democracy. We have many problems, and in some cases, this court makes rulings and decisions against the Russian Federation, and we do that, including certain payments that we do from Russian government funds. But in some cases, and I think you're referring to that, we get the impression that this or that court decision was biased or even politically motivated. We don't speak out about that, but we are aware of that. And that's why, with those decisions, we discuss them with our law experts, and our political leaders may say something about that. But this doesn't mean that we are going to abandon our membership in the European Human Rights Court. I would like to stress that any court should give all the parties the impression that it's not biased, it's not prejudiced. It doesn't matter if it's a domestic court or an international court. Okay. Well, I promised that I will give the floor to St. Petersburg, who has a question.
Thank you very much. St. Petersburg, the independent Volny Ostrov agency. Mr. President, I'd like to return to St. Petersburg and to Russia. You were talking about international affairs. I wanted to ask you if you want to become a magician, because recently we celebrated the anniversary of the great victory, and it was difficult to read the news about our veterans sending their medals to the Kremlin, about how they want to go to the US and ask President Obama for shelter. Maybe our country shouldn't be disgraced in front of the veterans, and perhaps they should be provided with decent housing and at least 1 car each that no one would be able to take away, to trade it, to pawn it, because some people do that, and that leaves veterans out of the street. So I wanted to ask you, maybe it is possible to give every veteran the habitat he deserves, because you can do that. You're the president.
Okay, thank you. Of course, I can't work miracles, even though I try to make the decisions that people expect me to make. And in this sense, this is something that every leader must do. You know, a little over 3 years ago, on May the 7th of 2007, I signed a decree that every World War II veteran should get an apartment. You're asking me now whether it's time to make such a decision and that we should not offend our veterans. Well, actually I have already made such a decision, and naturally there is no point in talking about that now, but I'm really sorry that those people who were able to make such a decision after World War II, when we had many more veterans alive. I can remember the mid-70s when we celebrated Victory Day, and they were all still rather young, and they had the same kind of problems then, but the government did nothing to help them, and I feel very sorry about that. So I think everybody should do the best they can. I was able to make such a decision to provide flats for all the veterans, and I needed. And of course it was not easy to do, even though we don't have that veterans alive today, but we're still talking about billions of rubles. Some people warned me and said, why do you make this decision? We don't have that many veterans, and they will not be able to get those flats. It's their children who'll get them. The veterans will die pretty soon, and those flats will go to their children and grandchildren. I don't think it is right to talk this way. At some point, the government should honor them for what they did for all of us. And one more thing I'd like to say is, even if they die, they will still realize that they have something they can pass on to their children and grandchildren, and this is very good. So all those decisions have to be implemented, and that's why we allocate serious funds to do that. Now, like you said, in some cases there are problems, there is abuse. We should deal with that, and we should be more sensitive. I know about the case that you mentioned. We just pointed this out to the local authorities, and immediately they were able to find money and everything. Unfortunately, this is typical, but this doesn't mean that the government shouldn't do anything about that. And my decree on May 7th, 2008 will be implemented no matter how much it costs. Okay, we'll go to villages sometime later, but first let's turn to our major media outlets. Let's turn to NTV, Vladimir Kondratiev. I think it would be wrong if we leave out our three big channels.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I wanted to ask the question that...
You can ask it again. When I entered this room, I was absolutely certain that the question about the second term and my relationship with Vladimir Putin will be repeated. It will be every other question. No? For some reason, it's not.
Could it happen that two people run for president in 2012, say you and Mr. Putin? Is that possible at all? Because a single party can't put forward two candidates, so you'd have to become head of a different party. And you said recently that the president has to be a member of a party, and he will be. Could you elaborate on that? Maybe there's a party that you could become the leader of. Maybe you're going to create a new one.
All right, let's talk again about the political situation. When I answered the question from Независимая Газета, I said that political decisions should always be well-balanced, well-considered. We're not playing games here. We're talking about lives of thousands and millions of people. We're not just playing games. We're not just entertaining ourselves, and the decision whether to run or not should be based on that. My relationship with my colleague and my political partner, Vladimir Putin, is not just something that people call a tandem. Actually, we have been together for over 20 years and we know each other a lot. We are very close. We think alike, no matter what some people say about that. We are very close, and our views on key issues of our country's development are very close. But this doesn't mean we always think the same way. It would be wrong. It would be boring. Every person has the right to have his own opinion, his own view, his own approach to various things. But on strategic issues, we are very close. Otherwise, it would be impossible for us to work together. And then this political partnership would fall apart, and we would have a different political landscape today. This is why, when we make a decision on what we should do next, we should consider that sometimes rivalry can be good, competition can be good, and sometimes it's bad. So I think when we make such a decision about who should run and who should do what in the future, I hope that we'll have this kind of responsible approach. Responsible, I mean responsible before the country and before the people of Russia. Now about party membership. Okay, if I run for president, naturally I would like to have a political force to rely on. Otherwise, it's impossible. We're talking about political parties. What kind of political parties? We don't have that many political parties, and actually I think it's quite good because I can remember the period in the past when we had all sorts of fringe groups. And I think it's in the past now. We have some major parties, and it's quite good. Whom should I rely on? If I have to do that, I will rely on those who backed me from the beginning. Okay. Next, is it possible for a president to found his own political movement? I think there's nothing wrong about that. Is it possible for a president in our country to be a party member? I think that most probably that's the way it is going to be in the future, because in most democracies around the world, this is the kind of situation you have. It's just in Russia that at some point we thought that if the president is the leader of a certain political party, then we will no longer have the kind of consensus we had in our country. But now that we have political forces formed in our country, and we have certain approaches to how we should develop our country, at this point, it is all right for the president to be the leader of a certain political force, and there's nothing wrong about that. All right, we are now going to villages. Okay, grab a mic. Of course, your voice is loud, but still.
The newspaper Territorial.
So you're a chairman or a journalist? Both?
Okay, my question is going to be about the development of our rural regions. We got a concise policy on it, embodied in the strategy for food security development. And we see that our priority task is to supply 140 million people with food. There are several threats that we're facing. The first one being the bankruptcy of agricultural companies. The situation is becoming quite bad in that sense. The second problem is criminal activity. Sometimes we see dodgy deals on the part of tax authorities. And the third problem is the absence of local self-governance. There's no authority in the region. What we would suggest is that in order to implement the food security doctrine, we will need a presidential decree to impose a moratorium on the import of agricultural products for the period. Secondly, we would have to relieve agricultural companies from all taxes. It will not be a large burden on the budget. That would help decrease the criminal activity that I spoke about. Thirdly, please pay some attention to local self-government, because we have to have local authorities. It is anarchy that gives birth to the crime. We would really like you to do that, and we're ready to help. Thank you very much. Please issue the decree today.
Okay, I actually took some notes while you spoke. Thank you for your question, for your emotional position. Let me tell you what I think about this issue. When I started working in the government, and I had several subjects that I had to cover, and eventually some of them became our national priority projects, and this includes agriculture. You know, at first, I even had a kind of a feeling that I would not be able to deal with such an issue because I'm a city boy. And when you deal with the villages and agriculture, you really have to know what it is. And of course, after I worked for a time, and when I was the president, I think I was able to really feel what the life in our villages is. We're not just talking about people who produce agricultural goods. 1/3 of our population lives in villages. More than 30%, that's the way it is. In many industrial countries, they may have 3 to 5% of the population living in rural areas, but in our case, it's 30%, and we should do our best to create normal conditions for those people. And on the whole, I think over the past few years, when we made agriculture our national priority and we have adopted a special program for developing our agricultural sector, I think we have made good progress. Wherever I go, people tell me that the money that we have allocated for those needs really helped. On the other hand, we had the global crisis, and it really affected the situation in agriculture. And then we had a drought last year, and we lost much of the harvest, and we had to do something quickly to help our agricultural companies survive. There was no law against bankruptcies, but basically we just issued an instruction, and it was tantamount to a moratorium. Over the last year, we didn't have any serious bankruptcies in agriculture, just some individual cases, but basically all productive companies, they were allowed delays, and some people said this was wrong and we should just abandon everybody, leave them to their own devices. You can only do that when you have working competition, but we are not there yet with our agriculture. We should first create necessary conditions. People who work in agriculture, when they're competitive with respect to foreign producers, that's when we can do that. So I think we should be very careful in dealing with bankruptcies in agriculture. But we cannot have a ban on bankruptcies. I think that would be wrong too. I will consider and think what we can do. Perhaps we can have some amendments, and we can have a special procedure for bankruptcies in agriculture. They should have a special procedure. Of course, agricultural companies are very different from regular industrial enterprises. And the same applies to taxes and local self-government. And I hope you will be as aggressive and emotional in the future as today.
On July 3rd, villagers from the region will come to Moscow. You'll be able to meet with them.
Yeah, let them come. I'll meet with them. Okay? Now, I wanted turn to the young man from Grozny. Please go ahead.
Chechen Republic, the newspaper Democracy. The first thing I'd like to say is thank you very much for the attention you're giving to our republic, for your support and your trust to the head of Chechnya, Ramzan Kadyrov. We're going to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the birth of Chechnya's first president. Could you tell us the way you remembered him? 2 years ago, the Chechen parliament asked you to name the city of Grozny a city of warrior glory, to decorate it with that title. As we know, Grozny was a major supplier of oil earlier, and dozens of Grozny citizens gave their life in wars. Mr. President, I ask you to acknowledge that and to give that title I mentioned to the city of Grozny.
I remember very well my last meeting with Ahmad Haji Kadyrov. That was during a meeting we had. I think it was a meeting of the State Council, and this was shortly before he was killed. Actually, the same day I met Ramzan for the first time. He introduced Ramzan to me. And I think just a week later, or maybe 10 days later, there was this terrorist attack. Of course, this was a very difficult time, a terrible event. I was the chief of presidential staff at the time. Vladimir Putin called me and told me that there was this attack. You know, I always thought he was a person who loved his people very much and who was very sincere about that, and he wanted to do his best for his people. He was very courageous. He wasn't indifferent, and because of his courageous position on some issues, the Republic was able to return back to normal life. So, those minutes that I spent with him, we would regularly meet. I will always remember those times, and I will always remember him as a person who made a very important decision, and by that he was able to save a lot of people, a lot of lives. Now about Grozny and this honorary title. Actually, didn't see this appeal, and I'll find out about that if the Chechen parliament has sent in this application. I'm ready to consider it through a regular procedure. What do you mean by O2 TV? Let's turn to you next. I keep looking at you in this sector, big sector over here, and then we'll go on to other sectors.
Our channel isn't very well known. Nevertheless, we're broadcasting to 13 million young people online. We've been doing it for 7 years. Our program is a patriotic one. We put forward the initiative to organize a competition of photographers called My Country. Any citizen of Russia would be able to take part in it. That would strengthen interest in our country, its traditions and culture and its heritage. And you, Mr. President, as I know, are a fan of photography. How would you feel about supporting this competition and maybe heading the organization council? We're going to finish it. And another question concerning millions of television viewers. You said you've talked about state support for the media on more than one occasion, and last week you signed a decree to create the first digital multiplex to broadcast across the entire country. Our channel will become part of the second multiplex that is currently being formed. As these multiplexes are formed, will you prioritize state media owned by oligarchs, or will our channel, an independent channel, be able to take part in it and play a part in the education of our young people?
Your second question sounds more like a political statement. Whom do you support? The oligarchs or the young people? First, about this photography contest. We really have a great country, a large country, and it's a good idea to have a photography contest for the people of Russia and actually people from other countries. It's very good. When I look through photo albums, I can see a lot of very good pictures there. I don't know if I should be on the board for this contest, but I'm willing to help. Now, to your other question, okay, my press secretary tells me that Sergei Mironov has been recalled from his position. Now, about the second and third multiplex sets. Well, I would like our television to be diverse, and in this sense, I hope you can trust me, because I really do my best to get information from various sources. The first multiplex set, the first slot, includes free channels, and we have assembled this set, and this sort of guarantees that our nation will remain undivided. The next two multiplex sets, we're going to have more actually a little later. Those should include the channels that are just interesting. Some of them may be free, some may be paid, but those should include regional channels, youth channels. So the main criterion is that this should be something interesting. That's all. All right, now what? Now let's go up there. Otherwise, well, I don't know. The man who's waving his hands over there. You. I don't know what row it is. I think it's row 6.
Good day. I represent MKTV, the television company. I have a series of short questions. The first one is, what's your stance on the economic development of the North Caucasus republics? Second, when will these republics cease to live on dotations entirely? And the third one is, what would be the federal policy in the North Caucasus in the future?
You said those were 3 questions, but actually I think this is all just one question. Developing North Caucasus republics is one of our priorities, because the situation there is much more difficult than in other territories, and this has to do with various reasons, one of them being that unemployment is very high there, especially with young people. In some republics it is 30 or 40%, and this may lead to very negative processes, including extremism, young people joining terrorist groups, and other things. So we are investing money there, and I think it is right to do that. When some people tell me we should redistribute our funds, I think it is wrong. Our country is strong if it remains undivided. If we do something different, if our view of each other becomes different, we can destroy everything we have created so far. So, supporting the North Caucasus will remain our priority. For this very reason, because we want those republics to be wealthy, modern. We want their young people and people in general living there to be happy living there. Now about subsidies. This is something temporal, but we will have those subsidies until we have a competitive industrial sector there. In this sense, North Caucasus republics would be a good place to develop tourism, because traditionally they have all sorts of things to receive people, and they have a lot of experience in this area. We'll continue with the subsidies until the economic situation there is normal, and I think it is the right thing to do. And we should actually do the same with other regions, but the North Caucasus really has a lot of problems. All right, now let's go over there. The first row, you. Yes, you.
Chinese Information Agency, Mr. President, this summer, this 10th anniversary of the Chinese-Russian Treaty on Friendly Relationship and bilateral cooperation, and the SCO. Can you give an assessment of the development of the Chinese-Russian relations over the last 10 years? And plans of Russia for promotion of the bilateral cooperation, and what kind of role this partnership will have. And my second question is on economics. What's your assessment of the current status of the trade relationship between Russia and China? And in what spheres Russia and China will be able to develop the bilateral relations? Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have a very good relationship with China. And this is what my partners from the People's Republic of China tell me, from the Chinese leadership. Perhaps we are at the peak of our relationship right now, and I hope it will remain the same way in the next years and decades. Our relationship with China is not something temporal or short-term goal for us. We are strategic partners. We work together in the SCO and in BRICS. We are trade partners. And we have agreed with Mr. Hu Jintao that we will bring our trade up to 100 billion. And we think that developing major cooperation programs is something that we absolutely have to do. So I think we have excellent prospects for our relations. We should just keep it going, and we should work on creating new joint interesting projects, including humanitarian projects. We had the Year of China and Russia and the Year of Russia and China, and then we had the Year of Russian language in China and vice versa. This year we celebrate 10 years since we signed the partnership treaty, and this is just another reason for us to think about the future. All right, now we'll go there. Let's make it fair. Please, you.
Mr. President, Garant Information Agency. We all know that the government has lately started communicating with its citizens in the internet, in the electronic sphere. I'm talking about online discussions of bills and online state service portals. What else are you going to do in this sphere in the near future?
You know, the more we apply new electronic methods in the work of the government, courts, and so on, the better. Just because we realize sometimes it's difficult for people to go to various government offices, so new technology should make the lives of people better. I will always remember how I went to Singapore and they asked me to register a company, and I said, okay, let's try doing that. And actually I sat down in front of a computer and I entered some data. It took me about 5 to 7 minutes. I just typed in an address, the name of the founder, something like that. And in 7 minutes, they told me that the company had been registered. And sometime later, they told me, you'll get an official paper certifying the registration. So I was really happy for our friends in Singapore that it takes such a short time with them. And then a little later, I found out this company actually had been registered and it still exists. You can still use it. So if you want to do some business in Singapore, I'd be willing to hand this company over to you. This is something that we should aspire to. We should use this kind of technology in our everyday life. It should be very easy to get property rights, register papers, documents, and so forth. That's the way we should do all the paperwork through a computer or an iPad. And I think we're actually making progress. We have really made good progress in the past few years. At the same time, some offices are still working in a pretty formal way, but we want it to be something real. We want our people to be able to do something right where they are, at home or at work. And this is our strategic program. This is part of our modernization efforts. Yes, I'll turn to you later. Like I said, I'm going from left to right. So how about we go to you first and then to those people up there. Kiev. What does it mean? You have Kiev. Okay.
Mr. President, thank you very much. I will speak on behalf of the Ukrainian media. My first question is that what is the Russian Federation's attitude towards Ukraine's European integration and the creation of the free trade zone with the EU? Will this have a negative effect on Ukraine's future relations with the Russian Federation? My second question is about the Kharkiv agreements. In Ukraine, people are criticizing these agreements since, well, the main reason for that is the way they were prepared and signed was behind closed doors. Could you please tell me in detail about the process of how these agreements were being prepared? Who initiated them? How did you negotiate? And another question I have to talk about is gas. Ukraine claims that...
No, the reason I'm laughing, I just saw some wonderful banners over here, so please continue.
Yes, Ukraine is said that it has presented some arguments in relation to the way the price for gas is being determined and that the Russian side has heeded them. Is that true? Have you discussed the issue with your Ukrainian counterpart?
Okay, thank you for your 3 questions in one. Of course, Ukraine is very important to us. It is our neighbor, it's an important country. I'm not concerned at all about Ukraine's integration into Europe. You're a sovereign country. It's up to you to decide where you want to be integrated. You can be integrated in the European Union if you're welcome there. You can be integrated with other unions. One thing I'm sure of is that Ukraine prefers to develop and be integrated with Europe. It will be more difficult for Ukraine to find some solutions with respect to the customs union of Russia, Kazakhstan, and Belarus, because it's a different union. You have to choose. You can't be both here and there. And everybody should be clear about that, including my Ukrainian friends and colleagues. You really cannot sit on two chairs. You have to make a choice. And European integration is fine. We're all European countries. I mean, both Ukraine and Russia. We're not just friends. We're advancing our projects on the European market. Russia has the trade of $250 billion with Europe. Europe is our major trade partner. So you have to choose either here or there. Now about the Kharkov agreements. I don't know if you were present there when those documents were signed. I wouldn't say that this was some kind of secret agreement signed behind closed doors. No, they were signed in the presence of a large number of government officials from both sides and many journalists. It was done publicly. The agreements, of course, this is a subject that encompasses, it takes a while to reach an agreement. First you have an idea, then you give instructions to your ministers, and they work on it, they discuss it. And we invented this deal with President Yanukovych. I can even tell you, this happened at my dacha. We discussed that. But this doesn't mean that this was something we did behind closed doors or secretly. A little later, we instructed our ministers to work on that, and we had a delegation representing the Ukrainian leadership, headed by the Prime Minister. And once again, we had another round of talks, and eventually we signed this document. I think the document is mutually beneficial. Whatever some people say, Ukraine was able to deal with a lot of economic problems because of that. But of course, it's not perfect. You can't solve all problems by that document. You can't mend all the holes in your budget. So you have to think what to do next. Now about natural gas. Of course, this is the subject that we very often discuss in our contacts with the Ukrainian leadership, including President Yanukovych. We often discuss this subject. This is an economic subject, even though the consequences, both for Ukraine and Russia, go beyond the scope of just the economy. But first and foremost, this is a matter of mutually beneficial cooperation. There are economic laws that determine natural gas prices, and those prices are based on universal formulas. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't think about the future, and we shouldn't consider the possibility of using all sorts of interesting economic projects, which, when implemented in Russia or in Ukraine, could make this situation easier. In other words, it's not ironclad. It's not like we have this fixed price and there's nothing we can do about that. If you offer us something, we would be willing to consider your proposals. But until we have this special agreement, we will go by the agreement that we have right now. We'll have to honor that. Well, if you want to say something, you are welcome to do so. Please go ahead.
I'm the editor-in-chief of an internet portal in Kuban. We were the first to report on the tragedy in Khrushchevska. Several days later, our website collapsed because we had too many visits. Then we suffered from DDoS attacks. The subject still draws attention from our audience, although their interest isn't quite as heated as before. Our portal is not pre-moderated, and we see people writing comments without any restriction. And what they're saying is that some heads of the police that were dismissed because of the Khrushchevska incident are now returning to their positions via court. You dismissed Mr. Kucheruk, the head of the Kuban police, and we still have the vertical line of authority, but this vertical seems rotten to the core. Is it possible for modernization to happen in the circumstances? Do you think renaming the police will help this?
Let me start with the police reform. We haven't talked about that yet today. When I made the decision to reform our law enforcement system, I had no illusions. I didn't think that would be easy to do. And I didn't think that we can make some purely organizational decisions and this will reform the entire system. No, you need personnel, you need money, you need kind of culture to do that. We all live in the same country, and I won't be able to come up with new personnel for the entire system in a matter of days or weeks or months. But this doesn't mean that the chiefs of regional police offices should be there forever. Those people who did something wrong or did not follow the situation, those people should be replaced, and I'm doing that. If you have been following the situation, I think in the last few months, I have dismissed more police chiefs than ever in the history of our country. But it's not just a matter of replacing some people, even though this is important too. The most important issue is that new people who come to work in police should be responsible, should be respected people, they should not be corrupt, they should not be indifferent. And I'm aware that what happened in Khrushchevska was kind of a model, a typical situation. What happened there is a real tragedy. At the same time, it is very important for us all to learn the lessons. And in this sense, the fact that this situation got so much attention means that the situation is really changing, because many people were actually punished for what happened in Khrushchevska, and this has never happened before, at least in the past 30 or 40 years, I think. And even though the situation is not perfect, I still think that this was good, both for police and other structures. Even government officials there are now more careful about what is going on. Governors, including your governor, appealed to me later. They said, you criticize us, you dismiss people, but we should have at least some way to affect the situation. I said, what do you need? And they said, you give us some kind of coordination mechanism that we may hold police chiefs accountable. Because later, when there is a problem, there's a crime or something, they tell me, well, we reported to you and you didn't do anything about it. And I said, well, okay, this should be done all officially and there should be a record of the meeting. When you have this meeting of a coordination council, you can tell them frankly if there is is there a threat? If, say, there is no threat, they will be held accountable for that if something happens later. If you tell them, okay, you need to pay closer attention to this village or that town because the situation there is alarming. And if they ignore your warning, then we'll bring up this record later, and then I will make a decision to dismiss this or that law enforcement officer. I think this mechanism will work. And it is very important for you to be active, because a lot of time we get a message from common people, not from government officials, because they don't want to talk about their problems. So it is very important to have this flow of information. And we had a lot of criminal cases launched recently because of this kind of whistleblowing. I'm now introducing a new procedure. We have what they call mobile offices where you can contact my representatives. I think it is very important for our leaders at the federal level to travel in regions and collect this kind of information. And of course, we should also use the internet and other ways of communication. You want me to talk about young people, huh? Actually, we could go up there to that sector over there. You in red.
Good day, Mr. President. I represent the Tirset Mordovia television channel. It's a sports channel. And I want to ask you if you believed in the victory of the Russian team next year.
Next year?
Yes, in London in 2012.
Okay, in London. Well, I think we should all believe. There is no other way. Otherwise, if we don't believe in them, our athletes will not feel confident. We should believe in them, even our chances are purely mathematical. We all root for our sports teams, but, you know, this is part of our work, of our job, to support our athletes, to provide moral support. Actually, I think their preparation is quite good, and we do have chances for 2012 and 2014. We have allocated enough money for that, so let's support them. Let's hope for the better. Okay, let's go back, because we have many questions down here. We have a question from the Far East, Khabarovsk.
Mr. President, like many citizens of the Far East, I'm concerned about migration. The latest census indicates that our region is losing people. Our young people are leaving, and we have the universal exams to thank for that. Sportsmen, entrepreneurs, young, promising people are leaving our region, while there should be building up the economy at the spot. Because what measures should be taken to improve the economic situation in the region itself?
I think you're right. Nobody feels romantic anymore these days, but still there are some people like that. I'm definitely not the last romantic person in Russia, and I think it is important to be romantic. Still, the measures we take should be actually similar to what we're doing now. I think they should be more intensive, and the volumes of our support should be more. There is a decrease in the population in our Far East regions. The way to attract people is to create new jobs, new growth opportunities, pay high salaries. Then young people will remain there. Actually, your city is very wonderful. Quite recently, I remembered when I went there and they gave me a helicopter ride, and I could see how nice your city is. So it is possible to have modern cities in the Far East. This is part of our life. Then people will be willing to stay there instead of moving to the capital or abroad. We should have government policies and regional policies for that. I think we have made a number of important decisions for that, and we will continue financing those programs that we already have, including the program for developing the Far East. In addition, we need non-standard methods like organizing, like helping people travel from the Far East to Russia's European part. We should make that easier, and we should develop communications so that people there don't feel detached from the rest of the country. People living in the Russian Far East should not say things that I sometimes hear. They say, that's the situation in the Far East, and the situation in Russia is different. When I hear that, I feel really bad, because we're all Russia. And our unity is the most important thing we have, perhaps. Okay, Reuters wants to ask a question. Let's turn to them now. You don't even need a mic, huh?
The Reuters news agency. You've been putting a lot of effort into improving the investment climate in Russia over the recent years. You've done a lot, you've said a lot, but the situation, like the recent cancellation of the deal between Rosneft and BP, are perceived by investors in a very negative way. My question is, what do you think were the mistakes Putin's government made when preparing that deal that led to the canceling? This question has been asked, but let me ask it again. You said that you and Mr. Putin are differ in details, whereas your general strategy is the same. But judging by your recent statements, yours and Mr. Putin's are quite the opposite. Like, take the situation in Libya. This is very important for foreign investors. Same on the issue on centralization and democratization.
It is very important to have a good investment climate. I recently spoke about that, and I won't say anything sensational today about that, but I will definitely revisit this issue very soon, including the forum, the economic forum we are going to have in St. Petersburg soon. And actually, I would like to invite you all to attend it. Major investment projects are part of the investment climate. I don't know what will happen to this deal between Rosneft and BP, because actually I think this was a good deal if we don't consider the difficulties that they had. But in my opinion, I can say that those who prepared that deal should have paid more attention to the fine print of some legal issues that always come up when you prepare such a major document. They should have been more fine about their due diligence, to use a special term, and they didn't do it. And eventually this resulted in difficulties with other shareholders. This is something that should be avoided, and this is something you need to discuss beforehand. If the deal goes through, I'd be happy, because this is a good deal for our country. Now about strategy. You know, when I said that we had close or the same positions with Prime Minister Putin, what I meant is the following. We really have common education. We are both lawyers. And the set of values that we have is very close. We both want our country to be modern. We want our country to be effective. We want our people to have a good life. We want to make good decisions. We want the rights of our citizens to be protected. We want to have a modern, diversified economy. But this doesn't mean that our positions are absolutely the same on some minor issues. And I think this is good, because you should always have some kind of discussion, or sometimes even a confrontation of different positions, to work out the best solution. Even on the matter of modernization, I may have my position that is somewhat different from that of the Prime Minister, because I think he thinks that modernization is just some kind of gradual development, and I think that we do have resources in order to conduct this modernization without destroying what we already have and achieve some good results. I think we should have a qualitative change, but we need to do a lot of work for that. As for the rest, I think these things are secondary. Okay, let's go up there and then we'll come back here. Okay, it's been an hour and 40 minutes. I'm not going to set a new record staying here, but if you're still interested, we can go on working for some time more. And then I have selected a few questions that were sent to me in writing beforehand. And at the end of our meeting, we'll probably have about 5 questions like that. Okay, that person over there waving her hand.
Good day, Mr. President.
Kaliningrad, huh?
Yes. A relevant problem for Kaliningrad is the visa issue and transit in relation to the recent events in the Schengen states. Will these events affect us, the fact that these countries are shutting down their borders?
Well, I cannot answer your question for the Schengen nations because we're not part of Schengen. We just talk to them to get our visas. What happened is was probably unexpected for a number of countries. I mean, what happened in North Africa and in the Middle East, and there was a huge flow of migrants, and that's why leading European countries made this decision. I think they are not going to change, to review their policies entirely. There are just some minor restrictive measures that they're taking. They're not going to cancel the Schengen agreement. But actually, since we are working very actively with our European partners, and we have basically common economic space with them, it would be very logical for us to have a visa-free space with them, and I will do my best to achieve that, because I think this would be very good for developing our economic relations with the European Union and other countries. All right, you, please, you.
Norway, Steinfeld Television. Mr. President, you said recently that trust towards the investment climate in Russia is on a very low level today. And about political responsibility, where the parliament ministers will be responsible for the crimes and mistakes made by their ministries. Would Russia become more modern if you dismissed the interior minister and the prosecutor general following the cases related to these ministries that happened recently?
Like I said at the very beginning, I think it is very important for every person who occupies a high position to feel responsible. I believe that all government officials, including the ones you referred to, are doing their best to do a good job. But this doesn't mean that they will remain there forever. Quite obviously, somebody has to pay for the mistakes they make. And we had quite a number of examples of that in the past few years. In the future, when I make similar decisions, my attitude will be the same. At the same time, I don't think it would be right to immediately dismiss government officials at the federal level for things that happen in their agencies, because this kind of situation is something that they inherited from the past. It was not formed under them. So I thought it would not be appropriate to dismiss them right away, but it doesn't mean that I'm never going to do that. Obviously, sooner or later, we'll have to have a rotation in all our ministries. And like I said, the government is an organism that has strong points and defects. But I believe the new government that we are going to have soon will have to be renewed. And this has nothing to do with the person who is going to form this cabinet. I think it's overdue. All right, Russia Today, go ahead. The reason I noticed you is because you had this heart symbol and your logo.
Including Grachov RT. Mr. President, Russia supported Resolution 1973 on Libya. What we're witnessing now is the coalition countries are exceeding this resolution. If the question of introducing a similar resolution in Syria would be raised, what would Russia do? And the second,
by whom?
The tradition to ask several questions. I'll ask another one. Over the 3 years and 11 days you've been in office, do you think Russia has become more known in the West? Hillary Clinton recently said, maybe it was a fact, that they were losing the information war.
Bill Clinton?
No, Hillary.
She's just being too modest.
Nevertheless, they're losing to a number of countries, including Russia. If we do call it a war of information, Russian media that broadcasts in the English language, has it made Russia popular? What should we do?
Okay, I think I know what you're talking about in the second half of your question. You're talking about Russia Today and the fact that you got on the cable networks. I'm actually quite happy because I think that other countries should know more about our country. To answer the second half of your question, I think they're understanding us a little bit better, and actually I think Russia's current foreign policy made a contribution to that. I think our foreign policy should be predictable and transparent, and this is not always easy to do, but still I think this is important for us to have good relations with other countries. Now, on Syria, I will not support such a resolution even if my friends and colleagues ask me to do that, because Resolution 1973 and 1970, well, frankly speaking, they were disregarded by the actions that some states took. And even though initially Russia supported the first resolution and then did not veto the second resolution, what happened afterwards demonstrated that these kind of resolutions can be manipulated. And this is deplorable because this undermines the authority of the United Nations. Still, I think it was important to have those resolutions because they demonstrated that nations are concerned, but it would be wrong to go on the same way in the future. I think we should let those countries make their choice in terms of their future development, and the Syrian leadership should sort out their problems. President Assad announced some reforms. Those reforms should be effective. I don't think we need to adopt new resolutions because this will not take us anywhere. And loose interpretation of those resolutions eventually may result in an altogether different situation. I'm referring to airplanes and tanks. Okay, let's go back to that sector over there. We have been on air for an hour and 15 minutes, so let's keep talking for another 10 minutes. We'll go to all the sectors, maybe one question from all the 5 sectors, and then we'll have some questions that I have selected, and I will answer those, and then we'll conclude our meeting for today. I'm looking at that wing. You have an exclamation point. What does that mean? Because you should have a question mark if you want to ask a question.
Maybe you're right. The Yakutsk news agency, you said that as you were in office, you replaced 50% of the governors. The people can now see what sort of governors you need to work with. Perhaps it's time to let the people decide for themselves.
All right, let me tell you what I think about that. It does mean that it is ironclad, but let me just tell you what I think at this point. When we made that decision to change the procedure for governor's appointment, we had a very difficult situation, and we had some populist methods that were being used in gubernatorial elections. And in order to strengthen government structures, we made that decision. And I was one of the authors, even though this decision was made by my predecessor. At this point, I think this procedure is more appropriate and more beneficial for our state, even because we have a very complicated nation. We have many latent conflicts, potential conflicts, and if we abandon this procedure right now, we may run into some difficulties. Some time ago, I said we will probably have this procedure always. At this point, I can tell you that I'm not so sure about that. In the near future, I think we should preserve the current procedure because it works pretty effectively, because this helps us manage our state pretty well. But I think that some years later, perhaps this will not be me or not somebody in the next 10 or 15 years. There may be a change in this procedure, but let me tell you frankly, the situation should be ripe for that. And another thing I'd like to tell you, this happens differently in different countries, and this doesn't decrease the effectiveness of local governments. And we had seen many cases where we had people, just accidental people, elected formally through democratic procedures, but the situation in the region was very bad, and this person was really unable to work, drinking or things like that. So this is something we should maybe return to in the future. Now let's turn to you, because we had a meeting with you, I think in Ufa some time ago. Yes, I remember right. So my memory serves me well.
Thank you very much. Thank you for remembering me. You have a great memory.
It's nice.
At this press conference, I brought the photograph from the press conference that happened 3 years ago on the brink of the presidential elections. It was an informal press conference.
I can actually take off my tie if you want me to.
Thank you. You were wearing jeans back then. Anyway, back then, me and our colleagues wished you good luck, and we were sincere in that. And it so happened that the people of Russia elected you president, and you became one of the youngest presidents that Russia has ever had. And we see that you're forming a modern agenda and policy. And an important point on this agenda is Skolkovo, which is to become the symbol of a new Russia. Recently in Saransk, we had a council on innovation. It was a session of a State Duma committee, and very renowned academicians and scientists said that we are growing technologically, creating technical parks and developing various structures in regions. But my question, no, please be patient. Do you think it's possible for the current legal benefits that Skolkovo receives to affect other companies working in the sphere of science and commercialization of science in the regions? Another question. You said, as you were talking to the Dosh TV channel here in Skolkovo, you said that you wanted to lecture in Skolkovo if you ever left the post of president. We have a learning center in Saransk. Maybe you'd be willing to come there as well.
Thank you. Skolkovo was invented and implemented so that we can later reproduce the same model elsewhere. Skolkovo is a symbol of our changes of modernization. This is not the only place where we should remodel our state. I would like to see similar structures created in other regions, and probably we can have branch offices of Skolkovo elsewhere, because we have technology parks and other things, and we can see the same kind of thing happening elsewhere. And Skolkovo is just a pattern or a model, and definitely we should use the same umbrella, as you said, same benefits in other places as well. Same preferences that Skolkovo has as the innovation center. And about my plans, I was very definite about that. I really think that sooner or later I will stop being president, and in this sense, I would always be willing to share my experience of working in the government. I think it is very useful. Right away, people start talking that I'm about to leave. No, it's not like that. But I will definitely teach because I enjoy doing that, and I think it's a good job, actually. No, I promised that I will go to every sector, and every sector will have a chance to say something, and I think this would be fair. So we go to you now.
Christoph Franzen, Swiss television. Mr. President, I have a question about the case of Hermitage Capital and Sergei Magnitsky. The Swiss Federal Prosecutor's Office is investigating a claim from Hermitage Capital related to tax fraud in Russia and possible money laundering in Switzerland. Will Russia aid this investigation? Thank you.
We need to sort out this case, and Russia is going to cooperate with any lawful procedures, including what is happening in Switzerland. Our prosecutor general has reported to me about what is going on, and I have instructed him to work on that. I can tell you frankly that I also had conversations with other law enforcement officials, namely the head of the investigative committee and the head of the FSB. We need to sort out this case. There was a very tragic event, I mean the death of Magnitsky, and we have to sort out that, what caused that death. And investigation has made good progress, and they told me that soon they will fully investigate the circumstances of the death of Sergei Magnitsky. But back to the case itself, including possible tax fraud and other crimes that may be involved, because it's not as simple as that may seem or as media report. We need to sort that out, and we need to figure out who is responsible for those crimes. I mean, both Russian people and foreigners. So I'm all for it, for a complete, effective investigation of this case, and then the results of this investigation should be presented to the public. All right, we now go to you with the yellow sign. Actually, there are two signs there, but we'll go to you. It's like a lottery. We don't know. Well, okay, yeah. Yeah, that's good. So who wins? One question each.
I'm a blogger. I blog about the Skolkovo Foundation. I think I'm entitled to this question.
And your neighbor?
He's in charge of one of our projects.
It's not a project, it's your neighbor.
But anyway, the question I wanted to ask, Mr. President, out of what you're doing right now for our country, what do you think will remain in Russia's history for years to come? We have long-term goals, short-term goals, and then we have goals for eternity. Which things of what you're doing do you think are really important?
So he gets to ask a question after all.
Yes, we came to a draw. The Russian internet is, as of today, defenseless. It's not defended against hacker attacks, as we've seen over the past weeks. Could you comment on what the state is doing to fight hackers in Russia, to find them, persecute them, like all other criminals should be persecuted?
The first question you asked was very important. If you don't mind, I'll answer it later. Now, about the internet, recently I had a meeting with some people from the internet community, some bloggers and some captains of the internet industry. And what I'd like to say is, this is a new area, and there are a lot of problems, including even the diagnostics of what is happening, who is to blame and what happened, and how can we prevent hacker attacks, including DDoS attacks that you're probably referring to. And the problem is there is no effective answer to this question in the world. But law enforcement agencies should have technical and legal means to find out who is behind those attacks and prosecute them. So we have agreed that members of the internet community will have a meeting with the Internal Affairs Ministry and FSB chiefs and discuss methods and means that we could use. This would be right and fair, and I hope the meeting will soon take place, and I remind those working in law enforcement about that. Now let's turn to you. Is this Kommersant? Kommersant. Okay, Kommersant newspaper. You're not Kommersant. You're also Kommersant. There are two of you. Is there a kind of competition?
Kommersant FM, Mr. President, is a Khodorkovsky release dangerous in any way to Russia?
The question is short. The answer is also short. No, it doesn't pose any kind of threat. Well, like I promised, it has been 2 hours since we started talking. This can go on forever. So I think there is a time when you need to stop. Of course, it's very interesting to be here with you, I can tell you frankly. But you know, because we have a very frank and genuine discussion, and all of you want to ask a question. Some of you had a chance to do so. Why do you say it's the last one? No, actually, I have some questions that I have selected. Education, healthcare. Okay, I'll say a few words about that. I have a question about that. So, what shall we do? All right. Let's do this. Okay, please save your questions for later. Life does not stop here. In fact, I think we're at the peak. And we'll have many more meetings in the future. And I will travel to regions, and I will travel to other countries. So, after talking to some of my colleagues, you can really see that I really talk to regional press and, of course, federal press as well. I have regular meetings with them. So, if you don't mind, let me now turn to some questions that I have been sent. I think you can see the essence of things that we haven't discussed yet, and just some interesting questions, things that are interesting to me. I don't know if you'll think they're interesting. I'll just mention the name, the author of the question. There is a question about NATO and the European Missile Defense System. We actually talked about that already. So I would like to thank John Guanjin, Zhen Minchbao correspondent. This question has been asked by a different media outlet, so I'll just skip over that question. There's another question which I think is very important, and this is something that we didn't discuss that much in detail. A question from Omsk. Are you here? Yes, you are. All right, so you're a little bit more fortunate. Mr. President, I live in Siberia, and like many other people in Siberia, I face the problem that it is very easy for me to travel to Moscow or St. Petersburg, but it's difficult to go to a neighboring region. To go to Chelyabinsk, it will take 14 hours by train, and the situation has not improved dramatically. Is the government going to invest money in transportation projects? Definitely. We do have programs, and they're being implemented, and we'll see some positive results. Not this year, not next year, but in the long run, there is a program to develop railroad transportation, and there's another program. We have a federal program for the development of transport means, and there are billions in those programs, and they will be implemented. And I realize that this is a very serious problem for people in our country, because it is very sad when you have to go from Omsk to Tomsk, and to do so you have to go through Moscow. We really need to recover our system of regional transport. We need to have airplanes used for regional transportation. As for railroads, the program of railroad support alone, I think, has 350 billion rubles a year. This is a lot of money, and it should be used properly, and I think we'll see some results. I recently went to China, and I saw how they're developing their transport infrastructure. between various cities, and they have high-speed trains. We definitely need to do the same. We should not abandon our advantages, competitive advantages, and we will definitely invest money in developing those. Then there is another good question. I hope you like it. A question. Are you here? Here you are. Actually, you were that close. So you actually sent in a very good question. So there is a problem about reindeers. It's the only animal that is being used more than 100%. It's interesting. A question about reindeer herding, because deer skins were used even in the space industry, but today they're just being discarded. And the question is how the government can support traditional crafts, reindeer herding in the Arctic, considering the matter of climate change. This may sound very exotic, but actually I selected this question on purpose for two reasons. First, because this is a matter of the lifestyle of many of our people living in the Arctic. And the second reason, in the past, I used to think this was something theoretic, but then I started working on our national priority projects, and while doing so, we had a special program for developing reindeer and horse herding in the Arctic region. And we now have 1.5 million deers, and we'll definitely keep investing money in developing those programs, but at the same time we should also pay special attention to processing. And I think regional budgets should find money for this, because the central government should not subsidize processing companies. So talk to your regional leaders about that, and they should find money for that. Now, another important question from Artem Pucheglazov, European Media Group. Do you have any filler words that you are trying to get rid of in your speech? You know, when I thought about that, I thought I'd say, yes, there are some filler words that I want to get rid of, then I'm going to get rid of. But seriously, I'd like to turn to you now, and I want to say that you have a very important mission. You're bringing news to our people, and the kind of language you use will determine the kind of language that our children will use in the future. So I think it is very important for all of us to do our best to use good language, proper Russian language, and we should promote it. And finally, there is one more question. Actually, our colleague from Skolkovo asked about that, and Yuri Pronko from Finam Radio has the same question. Mr. President, it's a year until your first term as president runs out. There will be a number of important events during this year, but can you say what are the main achievements and if there were any failures? And I think the question from our colleague over there was about the same thing. I don't think I can say something sensational, but there are some obvious achievements and important achievements during those 3 years, and those include, I think, that during the very difficult period of our country, when we had the global financial crisis, unemployment, we were still able to stay on the development track. We preserved all the main programs, and we did not have a radical change for the worse. On the contrary, we were able to recover it quite quickly, and we are moving on. I think this is very important, especially if you remember the kind of situation they have in many European countries. In some ways, they can be more successful than we are, but we don't have the same problems that they have in Spain or Portugal or Greece. And it is very important that we were able to overcome this difficult period. Another important achievement, I think, is that we were able to have a well-balanced foreign policy, and that this policy decreased our tensions with many other countries, and this helps us develop without being distracted for other problems. At the same time, we were able to defend ourselves, defend our interests, and we are still doing that. We can defend our independence, our sovereignty. I'm referring to the most difficult events, including August 2008. I think it was very important for our country to stay united, to feel strong, no matter what interpretation other countries may have for those events. This was important first and foremost for us. Now about failures, I think it is quite obvious. We were unable and we failed to achieve a radical improvement in life of our people. We were not able to develop as quickly as we wanted to. We had to deal with social issues, but we still have a lot of problems remaining. We have problems with poverty. We have people living below the poverty line, about 13%, and it's a lot for our country, even though quite recently there were 30%. Still, it remains a serious problem. We were unable to diversify our economic situation the way we would like to. We were unable to get away from relying too much on the raw materials exports, and this is something we will definitely need to work on in the future. Thank you. And finally, I hope that all those of you who were unable to ask your questions will get a chance to do so. Goodbye.